Hello, hello! Welcome back to part 2 of the top 10 most expensive cars to ever go and sell at auction. Alrighty, before we get stuck in, if you didn't see part 1 of this video, I would advise you to go back and watch that first. I'll link it up here. That's the top 5 most expensive classics to ever go and sell at auction. This one, cars 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Number 6, what is it? It's a 1967 Ferrari 275 Spider. Sold in August 2013 by RM for $27.5 million. This car is one of only 10 Spiders ever to have been made and was owned by a chap called Eddie Smith Sr. Now, most cars in this list have incredible histories. Often race wins are their main focus of interest. This car, the personal element is the great bit, and Eddie is an awesome chap. Sadly not with us anymore, but he started his life as an usher in a local theatre, funnily enough where he met his future wife. And he worked his way around various roles, moved into cab driving, then moved up the ranks. He then went to work for a mail-order hosiery company. 8 years later on though, Eddie's still there, but the owner has just died, and he's out on his feet. Eddie takes that scenario, I'm going to start my own mail-order hosiery company. And in 1952, he sets up the National Wholesale Company, with himself and 2 other partners alongside. The business grows and grows, diversifies into new markets, and 8 years later, Eddie turns around to his partners and buys them out. And this is what set Eddie up for his future ownership career. Some of the great Ferraris. How he got his hands on them? Eddie met Luigi Canetti. Luigi was the US importer for Ferrari back in the day. Eddie and Luigi got on incredibly well, and Luigi sold him multiple cars throughout his life. One of those cars was the 275 GTB. In other words, the hardtop version of the car that's at 6th in this list. Luigi knew that Eddie loved convertibles, so he came back to him 7 months after first purchasing the 275 and goes, "Look, I persuaded Enzo Ferrari to build some Spiders. Do you want one?" Eddie says, "I've just bought a hard top. What do you expect me to do with that?" And after a bit of back and forth, Luigi turns around and goes, "I'll give you your money back on the hard top if you will buy one of these Spiders." Only 10 of these were ever built. I think originally they had about 25 planned, but for various reasons that number fell down to 10. And Eddie owned this car his whole life. It was one of his pride and joys, and his values went northwards and northwards. He got increasing offers to buy from the most respected dealers, the most respected collectors around the world. Another interesting bit on this story, the 275 Spider was used by Steve McQueen in Thomas Crown Affair. If you haven't watched it, great film, please watch it. Potentially the one with Pierce Brosnan is better, but Steve McQueen drove the 275 Spider in that film, loved it, and ended up getting his own one, and he got rear-ended at a set of traffic lights. Steve was yearning for another Spider. The only way he could get one was get one of the existing cars off their owners. So one day Steve McQueen calls up Eddie and says, "I have to have your car. I would love to purchase your car off you." And he sits there and he turns around and he says to Steve McQueen, "Steve, I like you, but I don't love you, and you're not having my car." And he continually rebuffed offers for years and years and years. He owned it all the way up till the time he passed away in 2007, at which point it passed down to his family, primarily Eddie Smith Jr. And since 2007 the car hasn't done a whole lot. It sat in the hangar at the Smith family house in a special garage they built just for the 275, and it sat there, a few events here and there. One event in particular, they took it out. Eddie Smith Jr. drove it out to the event, and the amount of love and appreciation this car got by the people out on the streets when he drove it said, "I cannot keep this locked up in the garage. It's the wrong thing to do." At which point they decide to sell it. But here is another twist in this awesome story. Instead of pocketing the many millions they knew they were going to sell it for at auction, Eddie Smith Sr. was such a big philanthropist that they felt it was wrong if they had pocketed the money themselves. Instead, whatever the price the car sold for, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, they would donate all of that money to a series of charities, continuing Eddie Smith Sr.'s philanthropy as he would have wanted. And it turned out the car sold very well. 27.5 million, every single penny going to charity. Now that is a nice touch. And in 7th place, another 275, this time in 1964 Ferrari 275 GTB Speciale. This one sold for $26.4 million by RM Sotheby's in August 2014. And this car is rarer than the GTO that preceded it. There are only 3 of these Competizione Speciales ever made versus 36 GTOs. And this particular car was the first of those 3 to be built. First glance at the car, there's multiple influences. Look at the front end, a bit of 250 GTO, a bit of 330 LMB. The team at Maranello thought, despite the GTO dominating racing in the early 60s, we can go even better. So they took the 275 and developed it out. The issue was they developed it out to a point where it was too reminiscent of the 250 GTO. And the FIA thought the same. They refused to homologate the car. The car itself was £500 lighter than the 275 GTB as standard, and they wouldn't accept it into the GT class. And Mr. Ferrari didn't quite like that too much. Enzo turns around and threatens to leave, threatens to abandon the GT Motorsport series, and in the end, a middle ground is reached. And with a bit of reluctance, the GTB is homologated mid-season. This particular car, chassis 06701, never actually saw competition in period. Sister car, however, 06886, did. Le Mans in 1965 was a hot occasion, so hot that the car actually overheated mid-race and Ferrari had to take drastic action. It snipped out a front section of the car to make a hole to cool the engine, affecting aerodynamics, but it worked. And after 24 hours, the car placed third overall and first in its own GT class, first in many wins it would go on to achieve. And those series of wins, the story behind this car and the rarity of there only being 3 is why it sold for $26.4 million. And in 8th place, the 1956 Aston Martin DBR1 sold for $22.55 million by RM again in August 2017. This particular car, the DBR1/1, was the first of 5 to be built, and it is the most expensive Aston Martin to ever go and sell at auction. The roll call of drivers that have driven this particular car, as well as the other DBR1s, is insane. The list of events it attended is insane. Its mishaps along the way for this particular car is impressive. So, what happened in its life then? In 1956, Tony Brooks and Reg Parnell drove it on its 24-hour debut at Le Mans. For 20 hours, it ran well, and then it ran its bearings. At Le Mans again, a year later, Roy Salvadori and Les Leston are driving the car. It runs well, but then a fractured oil pipe causes them to retire, second issue. And in 1958, Sebring 12 Hours, its sister car this time, retired after just setting a lap record with Sterling Moss at the wheel. This car was driven by the crack team of Roy Salvadori and Carroll Shelby. Again though, issues. It had to retire due to a cracked chassis. I think you can probably see where this is going. And in June 1958, good news for the sister car. Again, DBR1/3, this time driven by Sterling Moss and Jack Brabham, completed the 1,000-kilometre race. Jack Brabham only raced 8 laps of that 1,000 kilometres, so Sterling Moss definitely did the heavy lifting. DBR1/1 wasn't so successful. Salvadori and Shelby again teamed up to drive the car. Gearbox failure meant retirement. There's a bit of a pattern developing here if you haven't quite twigged that yet. Let's wind forward a year. June 1959. Sterling Moss is trying to persuade Aston Martin to enter the 1,000 kilometres at the Nürburgring the year after he'd won it. And they agree. They enter DBR1/1, and this time the bad fortune is corrected. Finally, it gets its big race win. DBR1/1 comes home in first. Even more spectacularly, on the way round, Moss broke the lap record 16 times. It'd be the last time DBR1/1 ever had a Works Racing entry, but what a fitting farewell for a beautiful car and the most expensive Aston Martin to ever go and sell. And in 9th place, a 1956 Ferrari 290mm sold for $22 million by RM in December 2018. This particular car was the last of 4 290mm to ever be produced. For anyone who's watched part 1 of this video, you might remember that there was a 290mm that came 5th in our list, selling for $28 million in 2015. So, what's the story of this car in particular? It races the Ferrari Works car in 1956 and 1957 and did a fair amount of globetrotting during that period. The high point for this car is in 1956, a second place finish at the Mille Miglia. It's also raced at the Nürburgring, the Targa Florio, and then travelled north to go up to the Swedish Grand Prix, and then it went to the other side of the world, all the way to Buenos Aires in Argentina to compete in a 1,000-kilometre race where it finished third overall. It then retraces its steps and goes to the 12 Hours at Sebring, and then heads back across the water once more to go to Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas, for the Bahamas Speed Week, again where it puts in a good showing. Ownership wise for this car, it is wild and varied. The key thread in all of that, Luigi Chinetti, the US importer for Ferrari. Luigi owned it at multiple points throughout its life, but he purchased it in 1969 and kept it solidly for 19 years. After which the car gets sold to Ferrari collector and former Microsoft exec John Shirley. Shirley takes it back to the garage and spends 3 years restoring this car. Every nut, every bolt, and as a result of that, it goes to concourse events around the world and cleans up. One standout event was the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance. Not only did it win its class, it also won the Luigi Chinetti Award, celebrating the best Ferrari on show that year. And during 2016 and 2017, this is testament to how good and how high the quality of the craftsmanship was. It went back to Italy and got put on display at the Ferrari Museum in Maranello and also Casa Enzo Ferrari in Modena. And for $22 million, it could have been yours. And sneaking in at 10th place is a 1935 Duesenberg SSJ, sold for $22 million by Gooding & Co. in 2018. Now, Duesenberg is without doubt the least well-known name on this list. Ferrari, Aston Martin, Mercedes-Benz, household names. Duesenberg, not so much. However, the brand lived a storied life, and that's where I'm going to focus for the beginning part of this. They were founded by the Duesenberg brothers in 1913, and to be fair, they didn't do half bad. They won the 1921 French Grand Prix, they won the Indy 500 3 times, 4 if you count their win when they partnered up with Miller, but they failed to create a profitable line of road cars, and in 1925 they got bought out. They got bought out by a chap called E.L. Cord, and Cord tasked the two brothers with one simple, easy to achieve mission: create the world's finest road car. And 3 years later, they delivered the Model J. They planned to sell 500 a year. The stock market crash of 1929 put a slight spanner in the works for that. Instead of selling 500 a year, they actually sold less than 500 in total, and Duesenberg was shut down. Wind the clock forward 6 years to 1935, and Cord wants to get the company going again. His plan to kickstart sales: a celebrity-driven marketing campaign. He builds 2 SSJs, one of which makes number 10 on our list. And he enlists the help of 2 American actors, Gary Cooper and Clark Gable, and he says to them, have it for 6 months. Have the car for 6 months, get photographed in it, go about town in it, and at the end of that period you'll have the option to buy the car for $5,000. $5,000 in today's money is about $79,000. Small change compared to 22 million. At the end of the 6 month, Cooper buys his SSJ, Gable doesn't. Cooper's one is the one that sold here. Wind the clock forward to the late 1940s and the SSJ is acquired again, this time by a D. Cameron Peck from Illinois. Mr. Peck actually owns the other SSJ that Gable passed up on, so he now has both SSJs in his ownership. And he buys a second SSJ because he has a buyer in mind: Briggs Swift Cunningham. Cunningham's a fairly central name to American sports car history. He's a founding member of the Automobile Racing Club of America and the Sports Car Club of America. He raced at Le Mans. He also successfully defended the America's Cup in 1958, and Cunningham held on to the car for 36 years before selling it in 1986 to another collector, Miles Collier, at which it follows through to the auction here with Gooding, and $22 million buys you the most expensive American car to ever go and sell. Right, that is it. The top 10 most expensive cars to ever go and sell at auction. If you haven't seen part 1, again the link's up here. Go and have a look. Hope you find it helpful. Leave a like and a comment below, and if you want to see all of these classic cars and more, go to theclassicvaluer.com. If you want to know the price or price trend of any classic car, that's the place to go and do it.